Sarah looked like any normal passenger sleeping in row 12, and nobody knew she was actually an experienced airline pilot. Sarah Martinez looked like any ordinary passenger as she boarded Flight 447 from Denver to Miami. She wore simple jeans and a comfortable sweater, carrying just a small bag and a paperback novel. At 35, she had an unremarkable appearance that made her blend in perfectly with the other travelers, and no one would have guessed that she was actually a commercial airline pilot with over 15 years of flying experience. As she walked down the aisle to find her seat in row 12, other passengers barely noticed her. The flight attendants smiled politely as they helped people store their luggage overhead. A businessman in row 10 was already typing on his laptop, a young mother in row 8 was trying to calm her crying baby, and an elderly couple in row 14 was discussing their vacation plans. To everyone around her, Sarah appeared to be just another tired passenger heading home or traveling for business. Sarah settled into her middle seat, 12C, and pulled out her book. She had specifically chosen not to wear anything that would identify her as a pilot: no uniform, no aviation magazines, no flight bag with airline logos. She was traveling on her day off and wanted nothing more than to sleep during the 4-hour flight. She had been working long hours recently, flying international routes, and this personal trip to visit her sister in Miami was her first real break in months. The flight attendant, Jennifer, walked by during the safety demonstration and noticed Sarah had already buckled her seat belt and was reading quietly. Jennifer assumed she was probably a teacher or office worker, maybe a mother traveling alone. There was nothing about Sarah that suggested she had any special skills or knowledge about aviation. She looked tired, like someone who just wanted to rest during the flight. As the plane taxied to the runway, Sarah closed her book, put on her eye mask, and adjusted her seat back slightly. The familiar sounds of the engine starting up were comforting to her, though the other passengers had no idea she could identify every sound the aircraft was making. Captain Robert Hayes, a veteran pilot with 25 years of experience, was in the cockpit with his co-pilot, Mark Stevens. They completed their pre-flight checks and received clearance for takeoff. It was a routine flight with clear weather expected all the way to Miami. The passenger manifest showed 187 people on board, including crew members, and neither pilot had any idea that one of their passengers was also a qualified commercial pilot. The takeoff was smooth, and within minutes Flight 447 was climbing to its cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. Sarah was already fast asleep in row 12, her head resting against the small airplane pillow. The passenger next to her, a college student named David, was listening to music with his headphones, and the businessman in row 10 continued working on his computer. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Flight attendant Jennifer began the beverage service about an hour into the flight and quietly moved past Sarah's row, noticing the woman was sleeping peacefully. Jennifer had been working flights for 8 years and had developed a good sense about passengers. Sarah seemed like a quiet, professional woman, maybe someone who worked in an office or taught school, definitely not the type of person who would cause any trouble during the flight. 2 hours into the flight, while Sarah continued sleeping, something went wrong in the cockpit. Captain Hayes suddenly felt dizzy and nauseous. He had been feeling slightly unwell since before takeoff, but now the symptoms were getting much worse. He tried to focus on the instrument panel, but his vision was becoming blurry, and he realized he might have food poisoning from something he ate at the airport. "Mark, I don't feel good," Captain Hayes told his co-pilot. "I think I need to step away for a minute." Co-pilot Stevens looked concerned and asked what was wrong. "I'm really dizzy and sick to my stomach. I think it might be food poisoning," the captain replied, holding his head in his hands. Within minutes, Captain Hayes was feeling much worse. He was sweating heavily and could barely stay focused. Mark Stevens realized this was becoming a serious situation. As co-pilot, he was fully qualified to fly the plane, but airline regulations required 2 pilots in the cockpit at all times during flight, and they needed to find a solution quickly. Captain Hayes tried to continue, but suddenly he passed out completely. Mark Stevens immediately called the head flight attendant over the intercom. "Jennifer, I need you in the cockpit right away. We have an emergency situation." Jennifer rushed to the cockpit and found Captain Hayes unconscious in his seat. Mark Stevens was now flying the plane alone, which was against regulations and potentially dangerous if anything else went wrong. They needed another qualified pilot immediately. Is there a doctor on board who can help the captain? Jennifer asked. Yes, call for a doctor, but we have a bigger problem, Mark replied. I need another pilot up here. We can't continue this flight with just one pilot in the cockpit. Company policy and safety regulations required 2 qualified pilots at all times. Jennifer's heart began racing. She had never faced this kind of emergency before. She knew they needed to make an announcement to the passengers, but she also knew it might cause panic. She asked Mark what she should do. We need to ask if there are any qualified pilots among the passengers, Mark said. It's our only option right now. The captain is completely unconscious, and I can't fly this plane to Miami by myself for another 2 hours. Meanwhile, Sarah was still sleeping peacefully in row 12, completely unaware of the crisis developing in the cockpit. The other passengers continued with their normal activities, some reading, others watching movies, a few also sleeping. Nobody knew that their lives might soon depend on finding someone with flying experience among the 187 people on board. Jennifer took a deep breath and picked up the intercom microphone. Her voice was calm and professional, but those who listened carefully could hear the underlying tension. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your head flight attendant speaking. We have a medical situation with one of our pilots, and we need to ask if there are any qualified commercial pilots or military pilots among our passengers who could assist the flight crew. If you have professional flying experience, please ring your call button immediately or come to the front of the cabin. Sarah's eyes opened instantly at the word, pilots. Even in her sleepy state, her brain immediately processed what she had just heard. There was an emergency in the cockpit, and they were asking for pilot assistance. Her training and experience kicked in automatically, and she was fully awake within seconds. The announcement caused a stir throughout the cabin. Passengers began looking around nervously, whispering to each other about what might be wrong. The businessman in row 10 looked worried, the young mother held her baby closer, and the elderly couple grabbed each other's hands. Everyone wondered if there was really a qualified pilot among the passengers who could help. Sarah sat up straight and removed her eye mask. She looked around the cabin and could see the concerned faces of her fellow passengers, her mind racing through all the possible emergency scenarios that could require a passenger pilot to assist. She knew this was not a request that would be made lightly. Airlines had strict procedures, and asking for passenger assistance meant the situation was genuinely serious. For a moment Sarah hesitated. She had been looking forward to this quiet, restful flight and didn't want to get involved in work-related activities on her day off. But as she heard Jennifer repeat the announcement with more urgency in her voice, Sarah knew she had no choice. People's lives could be at risk, and she had the skills and experience that might be needed to help save them. Sarah pressed her call button. The small light above her seat came on, and Jennifer immediately noticed it. Sarah stood up and began making her way toward the front of the cabin. As she walked up the aisle, other passengers watched her curiously, surprised that this quiet woman who had been sleeping was responding to the call for pilot assistance. "Are you a pilot?" Jennifer asked when Sarah reached the front of the cabin. "Yes," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm Captain Sarah Martinez. I fly for United Airlines, and I have over 15 years of commercial aviation experience, including this type of aircraft." "What's the situation?" Jennifer's face showed immediate relief. "Thank God. Our captain is unconscious, possibly from food poisoning, and our co-pilot is flying alone. He needs another qualified pilot in the cockpit right away." Sarah nodded and followed Jennifer toward the cockpit door. As they walked, she could hear the murmurs from passengers who were now realizing that the sleeping woman from row 12 was actually a professional pilot. The businessman looked amazed, the college student took off his headphones to listen, and everyone watched Sarah with new respect and hope. When Sarah entered the cockpit, she immediately assessed the situation. Captain Hayes was indeed unconscious, slumped in his seat. Co-pilot Stevens looked stressed but was maintaining control of the aircraft, and the instrument panel showed normal readings, meaning the plane itself was functioning properly. This was a crew emergency, not a mechanical problem. "I'm Captain Sarah Martinez from United," she told Mark Stevens. "What's your status?" "Thank God you're here," Mark replied. "I'm Mark Stevens, first officer. Captain Hayes collapsed about 10 minutes ago. I think he has food poisoning. The plane is flying fine, but I need someone in the right seat. We have about 90 minutes left to Miami." Sarah quickly reviewed the situation. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, which she had flown hundreds of times. The weather was clear, and all systems were operating normally. The main challenge was that Captain Hayes needed medical attention and they needed to maintain proper cockpit procedures for the remainder of the flight. "Have you contacted air traffic control about our situation?" Sarah asked. "Not yet," Mark replied. "I wanted to stabilize things first." "Let's notify ATC right away," Sarah said, taking the co-pilot seat. "They need to know we have a medical emergency and that I'm assisting as a passenger pilot." Sarah quickly familiarized herself with the specific instrument layout of this particular aircraft. Although she was experienced with Boeing 737s, each plane could have slightly different configurations. She checked the fuel levels, reviewed their flight path, and confirmed their estimated arrival time in Miami. Mark Stevens contacted Air Traffic Control, Miami Center. "This is United 447. We have a medical emergency with our captain. He is unconscious and unable to perform his duties. We have a qualified passenger pilot assisting in the cockpit, requesting priority handling for our approach and landing in Miami." Air Traffic Control responded immediately. "United 447, understood. Medical emergency with captain incapacitated. Confirm you have qualified assistance in cockpit." "Affirmative," Mark replied. "We have Captain Sarah Martinez from United Airlines assisting as passenger pilot. She is fully qualified on this aircraft type." "Roger." United 447. "You are cleared direct to Miami International Airport. We will have emergency medical personnel standing by. Contact Miami approach on 119.1 when ready." Meanwhile, in the cabin, Jennifer was trying to keep the passengers calm. She explained that they had found a qualified pilot among the passengers and that everything was under control, and she also asked if there were any doctors on board who could examine the unconscious captain. Dr. Patricia Williams, a family physician from Denver, came forward to help. She examined Captain Hayes and confirmed that he appeared to have severe food poisoning but was otherwise stable. His vital signs were acceptable, but he remained unconscious and would not be able to return to duty during the flight. Back in the cockpit, Sarah and Mark worked together to prepare for their approach to Miami. Sarah handled the radio communications while Mark focused on flying the aircraft. They reviewed the weather conditions in Miami, checked the fuel calculations, and prepared for a standard approach and landing. "How are you feeling about this approach?" Sarah asked Mark. "I'm confident," Mark replied. "This is actually easier with you here. Having another experienced pilot makes all the difference." Sarah appreciated his professionalism. Even though she was technically a passenger, Mark was treating her as a full crew member, and they worked together to run through all the pre-landing checklists and procedures. As they began their descent toward Miami, Sarah made an announcement to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Martinez speaking from the cockpit. I want to update you on our situation. Our original captain is receiving medical attention but is stable. First Officer Stevens and I are working together to ensure a safe and smooth landing in Miami. We expect to arrive on schedule, and emergency medical personnel will be waiting to assist our captain. Thank you for your patience and cooperation." The passengers were impressed by Sarah's calm, professional tone. The businessman in row 10 later said he felt much better knowing there was an experienced captain in the cockpit. The young mother was relieved that her baby would be safe. The elderly couple held hands and said a prayer of thanks that such a qualified person had been on their flight. The approach and landing in Miami went perfectly. Sarah and Mark worked as a team, communicating clearly and following all standard procedures. When the plane touched down on the runway, the passengers applauded. They knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a sleeping passenger who had awakened to become their guardian angel. After the plane parked at the gate, emergency medical personnel immediately boarded to take care of Captain Hayes. He was conscious again but still very weak, and the paramedics confirmed that he had severe food poisoning and would need several hours of medical treatment before he could recover. As passengers began leaving the plane, many stopped to thank Sarah personally, amazed that someone who had appeared to be just another tired passenger was actually a highly qualified pilot who had helped save their flight. "You were sleeping so peacefully in row 12, said David, the college student who had been sitting next to her. "I never would have guessed you were a pilot." "That was exactly what I was hoping for," Sarah replied with a smile. I just wanted a quiet flight to visit my sister. Jennifer, the head flight attendant, was particularly grateful. You made this emergency so much easier to handle, she told Sarah. I can't imagine what we would have done if you hadn't been on board. Mark Stevens also expressed his appreciation. Working with you felt like flying with my regular captain. You made a potentially dangerous situation completely manageable. The story of Flight 447 made national news. Reporters were fascinated by the idea of a sleeping passenger who awakened to save her own flight, and Sarah became known as the guardian angel of Row 12. She appeared on several television shows to talk about the experience and to emphasize the importance of teamwork during aviation emergencies. During one interview, Sarah was asked what went through her mind when she heard the captain's announcement asking for pilot assistance. There was no hesitation, she replied. When you have the skills and training to help in an emergency situation, you don't think about your personal comfort or convenience. You think about the safety of everyone on board. That's what we're trained to do as professional pilots. The interviewer asked if she was disappointed that her relaxing flight had been interrupted. Not at all, Sarah said. Flying is my passion and my profession. Whether I'm in the captain's seat or in row 12, I'm always ready to help ensure safe flights. That's just who we are as pilots. Sarah's sister, Maria, was waiting at Miami International Airport when Flight 447 finally arrived. She had heard about the emergency on the news and was proud but not surprised by her sister's actions. That's typical Sarah, Maria told a reporter. She's always been the type of person who steps up when others need help. I'm proud of her, but I'm not shocked. She's been like this since we were kids. The airline industry took notice of the incident as well. United Airlines commended Sarah for her professionalism and quick response, and the incident led to discussions about emergency procedures and the value of having off-duty pilots available during flights. Captain Hayes recovered fully from his food poisoning and returned to flying 2 weeks later. He personally thanked Sarah and said he was grateful that such a qualified pilot had been on his flight during his medical emergency. Sarah saved my career and possibly my life, Captain Hayes said. But more importantly, she helped ensure that 187 people got home safely to their families. That's what being a professional pilot is all about. The incident also highlighted how ordinary people can have extraordinary skills that aren't immediately apparent. Sarah looked like any other passenger, but she carried with her years of training, experience, and dedication that made her capable of handling a life-threatening emergency. Flight attendant Jennifer later said that the experience taught her never to make assumptions about passengers based on their appearance. You never know who might be sitting in your cabin, she said. The quiet woman reading a book in row 12 might be exactly the person you need when an emergency develops. For Sarah, the flight became a reminder of why she loved being a pilot. It wasn't just about flying aircraft from one city to another, it was about taking responsibility for people's lives and safety, whether she was on duty or off duty, in the captain's seat or in row 12. The story of Flight 447 became part of aviation training programs used to teach student pilots about emergency procedures and the importance of teamwork. It showed that expertise and courage could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they're just sleeping peacefully in row 12, waiting for the moment when their skills and dedication are needed most. Years later, whenever Sarah flew as a passenger, flight attendants who recognized her name would often ask if she was the guardian angel of row 12. She would smile and say that she was just a pilot who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But her colleagues knew better. They knew that Sarah represented the best of their profession. Always ready, always professional, and always committed to bringing everyone home safely, no matter where she happened to be sitting on the plane.